The first red flag wasn't Mason's smug tone or even the ridiculous Rolex flapping off his wrist like it belonged to someone with a PhD in anything other than nepotism. It was the way he leaned on the lab's clean bench with a Starbucks in hand like he'd built the place. "Transfer the grant funds to ops," he said, voice flat, bored, entitled. "We need it more than some petri dishes and interns." I didn't look up right away. I was logging chain of custody for isotope samples with a federal timestamp tool I built myself. But when I did meet his eyes, I smiled. Not out of kindness, out of protocol. "You're not on the grant," I said quietly. "I am, legally. I'm Dr. Evelyn Rowe, principal investigator on a $74 million federal research grant tied to dual-use bioinformatics. That means the kind of funding that gets you quarterly inspections, full-spectrum audits, and a black-and-white clause stating any misuse triggers federal review, not just university discipline. This lab wasn't built out of wishes and department scraps. It was carved out of 10 years of proposals, documentation, hiring, credential vetting, and a 3-year pilot project so precise the Department of Defense asked for a mirror version at Sandia. And now this man-child, son of the institute's founder, decided he could dip into it like it was a college slush fund for his little operations sandbox. That would have been laughable, if it wasn't already dangerous. Before I tell you how bad it got, how close this entire institution came to getting blacklisted from federal research for a generation because of one trust fund brat in dress shoes he didn't earn, let me ask just one thing. If you like stories where the quiet person in the room turns out to be holding the trigger, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of you won't, and that's fine. But if you want more stories like this, it really helps the team keep digging. Back to Mason. He smirked like I was being difficult. "We're reallocating unused funds to critical ops. Founder's policy. I just need your sign-off." I had to count to 3. Not because I was angry, because this exact moment was where so many women in my position get cornered. Say too little, you're complicit. Say too much, and they paint you as insubordinate. I stood up slowly, pulled the PI agreement binder off the shelf behind my desk, and flipped to Section 5C. "Line 12, I said, tapping it. "Any attempt to reallocate earmarked funds without PI oversight or grant agency consent shall be reported as possible fraud under federal compliance standards." Mason blinked, like I'd just recited Alien. "You're overreacting." "I'm responding," I said, calmer than I felt. That's the difference. He walked out pretending not to care, but he didn't take his coffee. Later that afternoon, my admin told me our dry ice order, routine, pre-approved, recurring, had been flagged. Then our data server access slowed to a crawl. Then I got a polite but oddly formal message from the procurement office. Pending operations authorization required for lab-related expenditure approvals exceeding $1,500. I've worked with DARPA, NIH, DoD, and SF. I know what this was. This wasn't budget trimming. This was a quiet push, a pressure test. Mason thought if he jammed up the pipes, I'd fold, that I'd get desperate enough to transfer the money just to keep the lights on and the tissue cultures viable. He had no clue who he was playing with. Before the end of the day, I requested a full audit export from our grant portal. I backed it up to 3 locations: our on-prem drive, an encrypted external, and a time-stamped archive on a private cold storage instance I controlled. I printed out key approvals and grant disbursement records and hand-carried them to my car like they were national secrets. Because they were. What Mason didn't understand, what most of them never understand, is that the person holding the keys isn't always the loudest one in the room. Sometimes she's just the one who knows where the fuse box is. It came in at 7:42 a.m., a system-generated email with the subject line, "Directive, Budget Realignment Initiative, Immediate Action Required." I didn't even need to open it. The moment I saw Mason's initials at the bottom of the preview pane, my stomach twisted. But of course, I opened it. I always do. That's the difference between people like Mason and people like me. He plays pretend with power. I play chess with documentation. Inside the email was a barely literate attempt at an executive order, citing some fabricated strategic alignment clause and instructing me, as PI, to begin the process of grant budget reclassification in coordination with operations finance to support central priorities. In other words, transfer the funds. All 74 million of them. What made my hand tighten around the mouse wasn't the stupidity. It was the way he'd routed it through the internal compliance hub, the one used for legit directives and approvals. He was laundering the request through policy portals to make it look procedural. That wasn't ignorance. That was intention. I didn't reply right away. I took a screen recording. I downloaded the raw HTML source of the email. Then I pulled the access logs to see who else had been CC'd invisibly. One name stood out. Amrita Gill, Junior Compliance Analyst, recently promoted into Ops after a 2-week Special Projects stint. Her fingerprint was on the edit history of a budget overview doc that had no business being touched. Now I replied, Directive declined. Per grant agreement terms, budget line item reclassification requires written federal approval and sponsor-side justification. Attempting to do so unilaterally exposes both the institution and PI to compliance risk. I will not participate in such action. Then I quietly BCC'd it to grants compliance. No drama, no subject line in all caps, just a record. A seed. That's when the real retaliation began. By noon, our ethanol order was delayed, pending administrative hold. I called the vendor directly, someone I'd worked with for years, and she whispered, They told us you were undergoing an internal review. Our reagent suppliers? Same story. Cryo tank refills, suspended. And then the budget interface locked me out with a red banner that read, Access revoked, pending audit. I wasn't surprised, but it still pissed me off. It was textbook power posturing, the kind that hides behind process and pretends to be neutral. I'd seen it before in government projects when political appointees didn't get their way. You don't fire the whistleblower, you starve them until they leave. Except, I wasn't leaving. I opened my fireproof filing cabinet and started pulling hard copies. Lab certifications, reagent usage logs, staff onboarding forms, equipment purchase justifications, signed memos of understanding. Anything Mason could touch digitally, I printed, not out of paranoia, out of practice. Every printed sheet went into a blue accordion binder I'd marked PI Escalation, internal. I wasn't going to swing it around or make speeches. I was going to build a time bomb made out of timestamps and wet signatures. At 3:17 p.m., I got a Slack from one of our junior researchers. Dr. Rowe, did you get this? Attached was a new protocol directive from Ops stating that all research projects required pre-approval for any non-core expenditures. The language was so vague it could have applied to ordering paper towels. That night, I stayed late. Not to fight back, but to prepare the terrain. I exported our last 6 months of grant ledger entries and matched them to requisitions. I highlighted anything over $5,000, anything marked pending, and anything Mason or his newly absorbed ops finance team had flagged. By 9:41 p.m., I had found 2 line edits, subtle, careless. Someone had adjusted the vendor codes on a bulk equipment order to make it look like it went to general ops, but the serial numbers matched our cleanroom scanner requisition from 6 weeks ago. He wasn't just throwing weight around, he was beginning to move money. I copied the discrepancies to a read-only document, hash-locked it, and mailed it to myself from a third-party timestamp service. Legal timestamp, not academic, because what was coming wasn't an argument. It was going to be a forensic trail. The badge reader blinked red. Twice, then went silent. I pulled it back, wiped it, tried again. Red. Again. I stepped back, looked around, then tried the side door. Same result. The building I'd been entering every weekday for the past 11 years, my lab, my staff, my research, had locked me out like I was a stranger trying to sneak in. At first, I thought it was a tech glitch. Badge readers fail. Systems reboot. But when I saw Marvin from security, usually chatty, usually late-night poker updates, standing a little too straight by the reception kiosk, my gut said otherwise. Dr. Rowe, he said, avoiding eye contact, there's been a temporary suspension of access. Under what authority? He shifted uncomfortably. Ops initiated an audit on the PI program. You're flagged as non-compliant pending review. I was told not to let you in. I didn't get loud. I didn't plead. I just nodded like someone who'd been through worse. Because I have. Understood, I said, then walked calmly back to my car. Inside, I powered on my personal laptop, one they couldn't touch. My heart wasn't racing. My fingers weren't shaking. What I felt was something colder. Confirmation. This wasn't about oversight or a routine review. Mason had moved from manipulation to obstruction. I pulled up my backup sync directory, every grant report, internal budget trail, email timestamp, and lab equipment chain of custody. I'd uploaded the entire audit log over the weekend because somewhere in my bones I knew they were going to try to bury me. The federal grant system has layers of visibility. On the surface, they rely on institutional oversight, colleges, boards, finance offices. But beneath that, there's the direct line. The one most people forget exists. That morning, I opened my secure comms app and tapped the contact labeled simply Program Officer, Fed Oversight. Not their name, not their agency, just the title. I typed, PI access revoked without sponsor notice, possible override attempt, documentation preserved, requesting silent review initiation. Then I attached the full audit log and 3 flagged documents showing attempted reclassification edits. 10 minutes later, I got the reply. Acknowledged. Proceed with caution. No further engagement necessary at this time. That was the moment the emotional switch flipped. No more confusion, no more trying to find logic in Mason's actions. This wasn't a miscommunication between departments. This wasn't a sloppy admin decision. This was a coordinated takedown attempt, with a 7-figure target. Back in 2018, when I took over this grant, I'd requested a rarely used clause in the PI agreement, Section 14E, Oversight Escalation Clause. It allowed direct intervention if the PI suspected institutional interference with funding compliance. It was created after a high-profile fraud case in Maryland. Most people didn't know it existed. I did. And now it was activated. By 11:15 a.m., I started getting texts from my team. Our access to the lab calendar is down. VPN disabled. Can't access genomic data. Are we suspended? No. You're being used as cover, I wanted to say, but I couldn't risk tipping them off. Not yet. I sent one group text. Stand by. Do not delete or alter any project files. I am handling it. Then I forwarded Mason's original reallocation email to the program officer with a single line. This preceded the lockout. Contextual relevance. I didn't need to attach screenshots anymore. They were already watching. Outside, campus moved like nothing had changed. Students biked past, interns sipped lattes on the quad, and Mason was probably somewhere grinning like he'd pulled a clever HR trick. He had no idea he'd just tripped a federal alarm. And I wasn't locked out. He'd locked himself in with every keystroke, every fake invoice, every digital trail he thought no one would follow. But I wasn't chasing him. I was documenting the collapse. He scheduled the meeting like a warlord announcing a coup. Subject line: Departmental reorganization and interim oversight transition. Mandatory attendance. No agenda, no explanation. Just the kind of vague power move that smells like scorched paper and incoming lawsuits. I wasn't supposed to be there, technically. My badge still didn't work. My credentials were under internal review, and my team had been told I was on indefinite administrative leave. But they forgot I still had a legacy login for the Zoom integration, buried in the automation scripts for remote research logs. I didn't need a front row seat. I had the backstage feed. I logged in 5 minutes early, muted, camera off, name changed to one of our retired machine learning modules. Chronics AI Log 404. Nobody noticed. That was the point. Mason walked in 5 minutes late, of course, because people like him think timing is a power tool. He wore a navy sport coat like he was prepping for a TED Talk and opened with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Thanks for joining on short notice, he said, as if this were a birthday lunch and not a public execution attempt. Then came the bomb. As you may have heard, he said, our previous principal investigator is no longer with the Institute due to findings that raise significant concerns regarding grant compliance, financial stewardship, and procedural irregularities. He actually said it, out loud, on a recorded call. My jaw didn't drop. My pulse didn't change. I just clicked a small icon on the side of my screen. Record to local drive. He went on, sloppily, predictably. We are in the process of conducting a full internal audit to ensure all prior expenditures align with institutional standards. As of today, the Office of Operations will temporarily assume oversight of the grant's administrative functions. That was the moment several researchers visibly stiffened. I watched their eyes flick toward each other in Brady Bunch squares of disbelief. One of them, Dr. Malhotra, unmuted. Is the grant sponsor aware of this change? Mason smiled wider. All relevant parties are being informed as appropriate. Lie, documented, logged, dated. I already knew that actual relevant parties had been informed. 2 nights prior, a federal investigator had arrived in the city, quietly, no hotel reservations under their name, no check-in at the Institute front desk. I only knew because the program officer left a voicemail with one sentence. Your trigger was acknowledged. Sit tight. Which is exactly what I did. Because Mason didn't realize the moment he invoked malfeasance in public, he made this a federal event. He wasn't just accusing me, he was creating liability for everyone who went along with it. And I had receipts. The forged PDF edits? Amateur work. He'd taken a quarterly expenditure report and swapped vendor line items using Acrobat, thinking flattened layers would hide it. But the versioning system saved a preview hash. That preview hash didn't match the official submission timestamped by the sponsor side portal. I'd already sent both to the investigator with a side-by-side diff. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to defend. I just needed them to keep talking. By the time Mason pulled up a slide labeled Corrective Action Pathway, my Zoom log was an evidence reel. He was naming labs, listing procedures, talking about historical gaps in data management. Someone asked where the PI's documented sign-offs were. He answered, lost in system migration. Another lie, another flag. By the end of the call, I had 38 minutes of footage, 9 provable falsehoods, and 5 researchers now privately messaging me through encrypted channels. What the hell is going on? We know this isn't right. Do you need us to say anything on record? No, not yet. Because the beauty of this wasn't the drama, it was the quiet. The chill that spread through the department as Mason's swagger started to rot at the edges, as he talked and overtalked, as his story started to buckle under its own arrogance. I didn't have to fight him, I just had to let the ghost audit breathe, because this wasn't my defense, it was his confession. The whispers started in the loading dock. At first, it was just a passing comment from one of the lab techs. Hey, didn't we just approve that cryo order last month? Then a purchasing coordinator mentioned their spreadsheet suddenly didn't match what finance showed in the ERP system. Then someone in IT said 3 of the procurement tickets tied to the grant code had vanished from the logs, but only after they'd been approved. Something was being scrubbed, quietly, clumsily, and not even well. Then came the real flag, the one that cracked it open. It was 6:38 p.m. when my phone buzzed, unknown number, local area code. Dr. Rowe? A young woman said, voice trembling but clear. You don't know me, I'm Jordan, junior staff in accounting. I wasn't going to say anything, but something doesn't feel right. I stepped out of my home office, closed the door behind me, and sat down on the back porch. Go ahead, I said, slow and neutral. He, Mason, asked us to reclassify 6 lab invoices from your PI account. Nothing crazy, but he wanted them split into amounts under $5,000 each, then reassigned to a supplemental ops cost center that doesn't even exist in our current budget table. I said nothing, just listened. I asked him why, she added. He smiled and said, less red tape if they're small. But that's not how grant billing works. It's never how it works. It wasn't just shady, it was illegal. I thanked her calmly, asked her to forward what she had. She didn't hesitate. 10 minutes later, I had 3 screenshots of internal emails, a breakdown of the invoice splits, and a copy of a Slack message where Mason literally said, audit won't catch pennies. I wrapped the whole thing into a zip file, hashed it, time-locked it, and sent it straight to the federal investigator's secured inbox with one line in the body. Ongoing manipulation of invoice structure and ledger entries. Jordan, redacted, has not been informed of broader inquiry. Attached logs match known grant expenditures previously cleared. The reply came 2 hours later. Short, cold, final. Do not engage further. Let him sign the order. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Let him sign it. That meant the wire was coming. Mason was going to push the transfer. Maybe tomorrow, maybe by end of week. He'd probably line up some internal memo with a manufactured board signature or a rogue compliance note to justify it. He'd dress it up with urgency, toss around words like alignment, liquidity, or emergency gap funding. And someone, some poor bastard in finance, would think, well, he's got the title. He had no idea that triggering the transfer under false pretense would auto-activate a clause I'd buried 3 years ago in the grant's special conditions. Clause 7B, Misappropriation Detection Protocol. Most people don't even read the tail pages of their funding awards. I read every line. And I had negotiated in the clause after reading about a case at Stanford where a rogue admin had rerouted climate grant funds to a startup. My clause required third-party notarization of all transfers exceeding 1 million, and if bypassed, it immediately flagged the Department of Energy, the Inspector General, and the Office of Research Integrity. It was a tripwire, and Mason was sprinting toward it in dress shoes. Still, I didn't feel joy or adrenaline, just a strange, controlled tightness in my chest, like standing in a field of dry grass, holding a lit match and knowing the wind is about to blow. Because when that order hits the wire room and someone presses send, it's not just his signature on the form. It's the moment the paper stops being evidence and starts being a confession. The text came through at 10:14 a.m., no name, just a blocked number and 5 words. It's happening. Be ready. I didn't need to ask what it was. My phone was face up on the desk beside a half-finished mug of black coffee gone cold. The air felt denser somehow, like the static before a storm breaks open. I pushed the mug aside, opened my secure document vault, and tapped the folder labeled Pre-Trigger Protocol. Inside, a notarized affidavit of prior warnings, audit hash logs, comparative timestamp records, and a sealed letter addressed to the Office of Inspector General with a single line on the envelope. To be opened in event of unauthorized wire. I slid that letter into a FedEx envelope, stuck the label on, and left it on the edge of my desk, just in case Mason got lucky and the system glitch delivered before the Fed stepped in. It wasn't paranoia, it was protocol, built and tested across 15 years of grant navigation where one wrong keystroke could lose you a decade of research, or your license to conduct it. At 10:42 a.m., I got another message. This one from my former lab manager, forwarded quietly through her husband's phone. One line. He's in finance, has a document. People look panicked. Mason had walked in, all bluster and button-down theater, clutching a sheet of paper with our forged board's masthead and a slapped-on signature from senior legal counsel. Never mind that our actual counsel was out on medical leave, and that her digital signature key had expired 6 weeks ago. The memo was a Frankenstein stitch of jargon and desperation. Urgent reallocation of unrestricted operational grant funds in alignment with institutional efficiency model, board approved. No such model existed, but Mason was banking on finance not asking questions, just moving. One of the finance officers, Colleen, a stickler with a dry wit and an iron memory, pushed back. "Where's the verified board minutes confirming this vote?" Mason snapped. "Do I look like I carry around meeting transcripts? This came from the top. The founder approved it himself." She didn't budge. That's when Mason lost it. People say shouting is a sign of power. It's not. It's a sign you know the clock is running out. He threw around words like insubordination, termination, compliance obstruction. He threatened to escalate to federal sponsors, blissfully unaware that the actual federal sponsor had been watching this play out in slow motion for weeks. Then he demanded the transfer be processed immediately. No delays, same-day wire. What he didn't know is that the system was already compromised, just not by me. The grant account had been quietly marked for audit lock. The moment someone keyed in a transfer exceeding $1, the transaction would queue. The clock would start ticking on a required override, one that flagged half a dozen watchdogs, and he was about to press the button. At 11:06 a.m., I opened my secure laptop and logged into the passive monitor portal I'd been granted as part of my PI protections. Read-only access. No controls, just a clean, time-stamped window into the system they thought I'd been locked out of. And there it was. Transaction ID med M48737B. Destination account. Temp Ops Clearance. FIN 9911 amount. 74,000. Status. Authorization pending override. Key. Required timestamp. 11:06:24 a.m. He'd done it. He'd tried to pull the pin, but now the system had 30 minutes to approve or kill the transfer. And the moment that clock hit zero without federal validation, the audit tripwire would execute. The entire action, start to finish, would become a legal exhibit. I sat back in my chair, spine straight, breath even. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't excited. I was ready, because all the pieces were in place, and Mason Belridge had just stepped with full force into the mouth of the trap. The final 30 minutes felt like standing in the eye of a storm, quiet, still, but edged with a pressure that made every breath feel timed. In the secure portal, the wire's status pulsed in red. Authorization override pending review. That meant someone inside had stalled it. Likely the finance director, probably stalling under the guise of needing additional board verification. I owed her a bottle of something top shelf. Outside my window, the campus rolled on in its usual late morning chaos. Students late to class, interns balancing laptops and lattes, the occasional golf cart zipping past with fake authority. It looked peaceful, ordinary. But inside the operations wing, everything was about to split at the seams. At exactly 11:34 a.m., Mason was pacing the open hallway between the ops bullpen and the finance corridor, still holding that same forged memo, waving it at anyone who so much as blinked near a desk. "Why is this taking so long?" he snapped. "We're losing critical response time. This transfer was supposed to be done by now." He had no clue how loud he was, or how easy it was for sound to travel through an HVAC return vent, like the one I'd installed a $300 lab mic above years ago to monitor room noise for cleanroom violations. It still worked, and I was still recording. At 11:37 a.m., the door opened. He didn't even turn at first, just kept rambling to the poor junior finance staffer he'd cornered. But I saw it, the instant change in posture from everyone else in the room, like air being sucked out of a pressurized cabin. The man who walked in wasn't tall, wasn't loud, wasn't dressed in black windbreaker cliché. He wore a charcoal blazer, jeans, and a badge on a lanyard that said exactly enough: Department of Energy, Office of Inspector General. His voice was low, calm. "I need to speak with Mr. Mason Belridge." That's when Mason turned. At first, he grinned, a performative chuckle. "Oh? Well, you've got the wrong guy, I think. I'm just ops. You probably want someone in finance." The agent didn't blink. "Mr. Belridge, I'm here on a federal matter involving attempted misappropriation of earmarked research funding. You are listed as the initiating party on a block transaction under federal review." You could almost see the oxygen leave Mason's face. That subtle flicker behind the eyes. Not panic, yet, but the dawning horror of someone realizing the authority in front of them doesn't answer to their last name. I mean, this was all cleared," Mason stammered. "There's a memo, a board memo, signed by—" "Already under review," the agent interrupted, pulling out a second document. "And we verified that the signature key used was expired. We'll need you to come with us to clarify a few things. You are not under arrest at this time. But if you decline, we'll consider that a formal obstruction of a federal investigation." The room was silent. No one moved. No one offered to step in. Even the administrative assistant who usually chased Mason around with post-it notes and praise had turned away from her monitor. Mason's voice cracked. I need to make a call." "You'll have that opportunity," the agent said. "Right now, we're just walking." And they did. Right out of the ops suite, down the hallway. Past the glass doors where staff watched with wide eyes and tight throats. No handcuffs, no shouting. Just the kind of silence that rewrites the power structure of an entire institution in under a minute. I didn't cheer, I didn't speak, I just closed my laptop, logged out of the portal. Outside, the clouds were starting to burn off. Sunlight broke across the pavement like it hadn't seen what just happened, like it didn't care that the man who tried to burn a $74 million research program to the ground was now being escorted into a black sedan by someone trained to recognize financial sabotage from 3 miles away. And I, locked out, accused, erased, wasn't just vindicated, I was finished watching. Because the next part, the part that matters, that was already written, on paper, in ink, with my name. The campus email came out at 6:02 a.m. the next day. No preamble, no fanfare, just a line in the header. Leadership updates, institutional operations. I didn't need to open it. I already knew what it said. Still, I did. Because there's a difference between knowing the storm passed and seeing the debris for yourself. Inside was the formal language of bureaucratic cleansing. Effective immediately, Mason Belridge will be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an external review. Oversight of operations will transition to interim leadership. They didn't name who. They didn't have to. His name was gone. By 8 a.m., his staff badge was deactivated, his key card removed from the digital access board, and the glossy headshot that once anchored the leadership section of the Institute's website had disappeared. Just white space now, like someone had never existed. But the real silence came from higher up. The founder, Mason's father, Harold Belridge, had always ruled the Institute like a monarch in a lab coat. He didn't show up in most org charts, but you felt his presence in every hallway, every grant negotiation, every carefully arranged donation gala where his name was always spelled in bold. That morning, he issued a single, clipped statement through the university's general counsel. Due to an unforeseen health matter, Dr. Belridge will be stepping back from his day-to-day involvement in institutional affairs. We wish him a full and speedy recovery, which, in translation, meant they told him to step aside before the subpoenas got warm. But the most telling moment didn't come from press releases or hallway gossip. It came during a closed-door emergency session between the Institute's governing board and the Office of Research Compliance. I wasn't invited, but I was mentioned. A board member, an old-school retired admiral who'd once cornered me at a holiday mixer and grilled me for 10 minutes about cyber biosecurity, stood up with a manila folder thick with printed audit logs and said, if Dr. Rowe hadn't documented what she did, we'd be facing a full debarment from federal funding right now. He laid my compliance trail on the table like a shield. The time-stamped refusal to reclassify the funds, the secured audit exports, the notarized forensic analysis of Mason's forged documents, the side-by-side invoice breakdowns, the Slack transcript, the call logs, the sealed envelope labeled Trigger Protocol, Federal Oversight Only. They passed the pages around like scripture. Not one of them asked if I'd exaggerated, or if I'd gone too far, because by then, they all knew what I knew. I hadn't fought to protect my lab. I'd fought to protect the entire damn institute, and I did it without raising my voice, without threatening a soul, without storming into boardrooms demanding titles and apologies. All I'd done was follow the rules. Perfectly. I got no parade, no apology, no reinstatement ceremony. But that afternoon, my system access was restored. I walked into my lab like I'd never been gone. The team looked up, some with relief, some with quiet admiration, but no one said a word. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said, in documentation, in silence, and in the abrupt vacancy where Mason's authority used to be. Later that evening, I checked the website again. This time, not just Mason's photo was gone. His father's founding vision bio page had vanished too. All that remained was a placeholder. Page under revision. Good. Let it stay that way. Sometimes, the cleanest justice comes not in thunder or spectacle, but in white space where hubris used to live. The reinstatement letter was anticlimactic. No bold font, no apologies, just a plain PDF titled Notice of Continuity Restoration, Principal Investigator Authorization. But when I opened it, the weight behind the words hit like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. Effective immediately, oversight of Grant ID 74X3 is returned to Dr. Evelyn Rowe as the authorized principal investigator. All prior restrictions are lifted. Institutional access is restored. There was a time I might have printed it, framed it, maybe even read it twice, but not that day. I closed the file, signed the acknowledgement, and sent it off with the kind of practiced efficiency that comes when you've been right for so long. It stopped feeling like vindication and started feeling like a quiet necessity. The feds were clean in their handling, no perp walk, no press release. Just a private communication from the Department of Energy's Compliance Division. Mason Belridge has been formally disqualified from participating in any federally funded research programs for a period no less than 10 years. His attempt to misappropriate funds was logged, certified, and entered into the agency's permanent audit trail. That was it. Not jail, just erasure, the kind of institutional death sentence that matters more than any headline. No more shortcuts. No more sealed doors with his name, just cold exclusion from the ecosystem he tried to rig. But the bigger surprise came a week later. I got a call from Washington. No number, just the kind of ringtone you set aside for rare moments. The voice on the line introduced herself simply as the Director of National Research Oversight at the Office of Science Policy. She said they'd reviewed my documentation. Quietly, thoroughly, and they were extending an invitation. "Would you consider serving on our external advisory panel?" she asked. "We're drafting new standards for institutional compliance escalation. You'd be helping to write the policies you already modeled." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch. Not because I was unsure, but because the part of me that had been fighting to stay in was finally ready to step above. I said yes. The next morning, I walked through the glass doors of the same building that once rejected my badge. This time, no red lights, no guards, no whispered excuses, just a quiet nod from reception and a hallway that felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I passed Mason's old office. It was already someone else's space. Nameplate gone, whiteboard wiped clean, desk empty except for a single box of tissues and a jar of blue pens. No ghosts, just absence. When I got to my office, something was sitting on my desk. A small envelope. No label, sealed in thick, expensive paper. Inside, a folded letter, handwritten, dated the day after the audit concluded. Dr. Rowe, your conduct preserved institutional integrity. You didn't just protect your program, you protected ours. J.R., Inspector General's Office. I read it once, then again, then slid it into the side of my desk drawer, right next to the signed grant agreement that had started it all. Outside, the wind kicked up, scattering leaves across the quad. Students laughed. Deliveries rolled in. The building buzzed like nothing had ever happened. And maybe for them, it hadn't. But for me, everything had shifted. No spotlight, no podium, just one line. Quiet, unmoved. Signed in black ink beneath every audited page. Some people play office. Some of us sign the line that gets audited.